Hi there, I'm going to be talking through the sketchbook that I made for exercise exploring drawing and painting. For this exercise I had to collect a number of pieces of paper and then on each piece of paper draw the same object over and over again, but using different materials, different paints, things like that, to create different textures. So for this sketchbook I've used two frame backs, so picture frame backs for the front and the back to keep it nice and secure. And then to add to that secureness, I've used some elastic. So this elastic I actually collect from some packaging from work. So yeah, I'll talk through it. So for this first piece, I've gone quite simple with using white card, and I've used soft pastels. So for each of these drawings, I've just drawn a picture of one of my trainers. So yes, the soft pastel. This one I kept quite detailed as the first image, but then also showing quite a loose look because the pastels is kind of spread everywhere. The next one, I've used some card from packaging from Mont Blanc, and on here I've used fabric pens. So I thought it would be nice to do something different. Obviously with fabric pens you assume to do them on fabric, so I thought why not put it on paper. So here I've used fabric pens. I've taken a bit more of a close-up view of the shoe, and I've put this on canvas material, which was just from a bag that I cut out to make this the size of the paper. Here I've used watercolour paper and oil pastels. Again, it's quite a zoomed in version of the shoe. I quite like the textures of this from both the pastels and from the watercolour paper, because there's quite a lot of white still showing through that gives that sort of depth and highlight to the trainer. This one I quite like. It's on just lined paper, and I've used a quill and feather pen with ink to create the shoe. I quite like the lines on this. It's quite illustrative in ways, and the cross hatching and different dots and ways to add texture and definition, and where I've used more ink in like the darker areas, darker shaded areas. Here I've just used printing office paper, and I've created a collage of the shoe. I really like this one. I love the colours, I love the definition. I like the way that using the Sharpie, I've actually gone over the edges to define it. The same with the front. And then to add some shading, I've used just like ink, which I think is quite nice. I like the rigidness of the paper, well, the rigidness of the collage, and then the flimsiness of the paper. Here I've used gummed tape, which I've stuck onto just drawing paper. And then I've used ink again, but this time I've used a toothbrush to create the outlines and textures. I love like the energeticness of this this experiment. All the lines coming off, and yeah, it's really interesting. And the black against the brown is really dramatic and intense. This is just sketch pad paper using ink and water, so it's a very different contrast. So with here I've just used ink without water, and it gives that real dark dramatic look, whereas this is a bit more soothing, as you can see the difference where the water in concentration is a little bit higher, and it creates like a grey look. Yeah, this is photo paper, and I've used oil pastels on this. I've actually, for this, I covered the paper in oil pastel first, and then carved out the shape of the shoe using a canvas key, as you can see. I've actually gone over some of to add more definition with a grey pencil, but I don't actually think that worked very well. It's made it look a bit dirty. Did the same thing here, but I used a torn out piece of paper from a book, but then instead of adding the pencil, I've just carved again using the key, the canvas key, sorry, to create the shoe. It's really small, it's not very clear. I think that might be to do with the dark of the pastel, and the pastel colour is actually seems to have absorbed into the paper a bit, because I've not been able to completely scratch away to create this lovely white shade. Similar thing here, but instead of using the pastel, I've used pencil. And instead of using the canvas key to remove the shape of the shoe, I've actually used a putty eraser. Again, this is not very clear, it hasn't worked very well. I think that's because the putty eraser is more for blending and things like that, and this is not, it doesn't give that sharp look. If I could have managed, if I was able to create like a real sharp look of the white, or like the colour of the paper, it'd look a bit more clear, or even a darker pencil for the background, for the negative space. That inspired me for this one to actually use a darker material, which is the charcoal pencil. And what I've actually done here is remove the negative space using an eraser, and then gone over the outline of the shoe and the detail using charcoal again to create that real dark look. It's a lot more dramatic. There's a little foreshortening in these pictures of the shoe, but I was just working really quickly because I wanted to explore the material rather than focusing on the shape of the shoe. This I've used the Chinese rice paper and just ink using a cotton pad. No, sorry, a cotton bud. I can't think of the name. You can see there. So I've used it in different ways. So I've dotted the pad here, and that's just created that real intense colour, and then dragged it across to extend the colour, but it's also created this sort of stippling look when it's lost its paper paint. Here I've just used some packaging paper from the Tate, again using ink, but here I've used the quill again. So similarly to what I did on the lined piece of paper, but here I've done it on a different shinier paper. And it's actually, I remember drawing this and it's kind of cut into the paper a little bit because of the sharpness of the quill. This one didn't work very well, but it was fun to create. I stuck crepe paper to just normal paper and then went over the top quite quickly using a silver Sharpie pen. It's not really clear what it is, but again, it's another, you know, mark making experience, and yeah, I like the texture of the paper. It's quite rigid as well, which is created from the paint, the glue, sorry. This, I really like this one. This is, again, crepe paper stuck to just normal paper, but I've gone over the top using gesso, and then alcohol pens to create the shape of the shoe. I actually like the fact that you can see the black crepe paper through the gesso. I've not gone completely mad in covering it in white because I quite like the blockiness in some of the areas, but it's in a kind of subtle, faint way. But I also like the way that the alcohol pens has absorbed into the tissue paper that I've used to create kind of like a watercolour look. It's really interesting. And then the black alcohol pen over the top just has that definition and gives it kind of a modern illustrative look. I actually, for this exercise, explored ways of making your own paper. So I found a video online, which is on my blog post. So this is one of the first in this book where you can actually see the paper that I've created. So I actually used this, created this out of newspaper, which I shredded and made into a pulp and then put into a kind of netted frame to create the shape and then let everything dry. This paper is quite absorbent, so it was quite difficult to work with, but it was really interesting. So here on this one, I've actually used acrylic ink, and a cotton bud again to create the shape of the shoe. It's not my favourite, I'm not a fan of the colours. It's a little bit garish, but different way. So this one I've used rice paper again, but firstly I actually doused the rice paper in tea to create the tanned look, and then went over the top with acrylic paint using a loyalty card this time. So loyalty card, you can see, because it's quite straight lines and blocky, and it's not that curved that you would get with a shoe. But I like the brown colour with the blues, really nice. This one I've used oil paint and a train card, but this time it's on foam. So again, you can see the real blockiness, and there's not much curved lines within this shoe because of the use of the train card. Yeah, and I like the way that I've cut into the paint using the train card to add the definition. I found it quite hard with the laces. I couldn't really add the circle look, but I quite like the way it kind of bends and then disappears to imply a highlight there. This one is just coloured paper, but this time I've used enamel paint. And I used a clay tool with this one. So where I like the difference, you've got a shiny look with the matte. You can see. Yeah, there you go. But obviously where the matte look is more obvious, where the paint is thinner, and then where I've let the paint stay a bit thick, it creates that shiny look, which is really fun. Doesn't really look like a shoe, but it's quite dramatic. There's a similar thing here, but this time I've used newspaper instead of the just normal card. Again, enamel paint, and this one's a lot more shiny because I allow the paint to maintain its thickness. Yeah, this one is another example of some paper that I created using the pulp. Here I've used the gouache paint with a piece of cardigan to add to create the shape of the shoe. The paper, as I said, is quite absorbent, so it's quite hard to work with the gouache, and I think I didn't add any water with this one, so the paint's a little bit more intense. You'll see later on, actually in the next one, where it's a bit more watery. For example, this one here is again with the gouache paint, but I've added water, so it's got more of a blending look. So that was different. And then this is where I've not used the water. Yeah, I like this one. I like the tanned colour of the paper in the background. And I'm not really used to using the gouache paint. So this was a new experience for me, but it was really fun. I like the use of the colours and the different highlights, the different shades to build up the form. I actually used that with just a paintbrush, so I was able to add a bit more definition. This I've used cartridge paper, and I created the shape of the shoe using a candle first, and then went over the top using the gouache paint and water to have that relief look. I've done this various times throughout. Again, did the same thing here, but here I've used a vintage paper. It's not clear what the shoe is, but I think that's probably due to the paper colour and the fact that the paint isn't very dark or isn't very intense. So this inspired me to do the next one, where I've used a darker paint colour and a darker card colour. Again, using the candle first, painting over the top to create that relief look, and it's much clearer in what it is. Again, all working quite quickly with these. I really like this one. I'm a fan of working with like the tanned background or on craft paper and the tea stained colour. But here I've used oil paint and a palette knife. And I like the way that with the palette knife I've cut into the paint to create the lines from the shoe. I also like the contrast of messiness with this. And then the sharp definition of the shoes. It kind of adds movement, which is really fun. Here is another piece of paper that I made. And again, for this, I've used oil paint and a sponge this time. There's a great texture with this. And you can really see the thickness of the paint as well. Here is another example of paper that I created. This paper is a lot thicker than the other ones. This is a lot thinner because I added more pulp onto this one. But for this shoe, I actually created the shape of the shoe using a hot glue gun first, and then went over the top with paint, and then pulled the hot glue away to create, again, like leaving that negative space, like the outlines. This doesn't work very well, you can't really see it's a shoe, but it's an interesting way to create a mark. I did the same thing here. Instead of adding paint, I've just used the hot glue gun. but I've used a pearlized paper here. So there's a different collection of card. Again, you can't really see what it is, but I quite like the way that the glue has removed some of the top layer of paper, so then you're left with this white raw look. This one is actually where I've kept the hot glue on the card, and to create the shape of the shoe you have to work very quickly with glue before it dries, so it's quite rigid in the way it looks. Again, it's not really clear what the actual thing is, but it was fun to create. This is another example of the paper I made, but this time I've added petals in to add like a natural feel to it. Here I've used watercolour and wooden fork to apply the outline of the shoe. It's not clear what it is at all, and it didn't really work very well, but it was interesting. This one I really like. I've used foam for the background, but embroidery thread, which I sewed on to the foam. It's really well. I like the straightness of the lines, it just looks really cool. It's quite a lot of foreshortening in this one, but I think that's quite obvious with most of them. It hasn't really worked in that way. Here I've used just a black card, and I've used a scalpel to scratch out the shape of the shoe. It's not very clear what it is, but I think where I've actually scratched away more using the scalpel, you can see a little bit clearer the shape and the outline, but where it's thin, it's not very clear. It's more like you have to get the light in the right way to be able to see this clearly, but it hasn't worked that well. Maybe if I'd used a lighter coloured card, or if I'd maybe used the blue pearl card and then scratched into it, I could have got that some white layer and it would have been a bit clearer. Yeah, so that was the last one in the book where I've drawn the shoe in some way, and then I just kept collecting paper. So I've got oil paper here, just kitchen towel, a craft wrapping paper, another example of some paper that I made out of pulp. This is the paper that I use when I'm applying, like when I'm doing any painting. I'll put the paint onto this and then just rip it away, and then it's easier with cleaning. This is just some packaging paper that you find in chocolate boxes. This was one of the pieces of paper from the frames that I used to make the sketchbook. Some metallic tissue paper, some normal black paper, crepe paper, a magazine, but here I've got like the picture of the penguins, tracing paper, another magazine piece of paper, coloured card, baking paper, another piece of coloured paper, and then 2 pieces of pattern paper. Yeah, so that's it. Thanks for watching.